Well, guys, the draft of the Senate version of the Clarity Act is now out. We have a text we can actually look at. And at this point, maybe the best and most accurate thing I can say about this is that the problem with lies is that you eventually have to make them true or they collapse under the weight of the cognitive dissonance. And this draft is kind of the fruition of that. If you're just glad to see any progress on crypto regulatory clarity, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Oh man, guys. Oh man, is this do we have a lot to talk about? We have a lot to talk about tonight, and it's not as bad as it could be, but it's also not any better than I expected. It's sort of like, let's see, I'm trying to remember what I'm allowed to say in the first 60 seconds of a YouTube video. I guess it's not monetized anyway, so we don't give a damn. We're getting fucked about as bad as I expected. Not really much worse than I expected, but definitely not less than I expected. This is about the amount of fuckery I expected. And the reason for this is pretty obvious to me. Let's see who's here first. Before we jump into it, let's see who's here. Taz is here. Yep, this is going to be fun. Eric Williams is here. Let's go. Joe Davidson is here. Let's go. Let's go. Guinness Speaks is here. I really want to see this one. What's up, guys? What's up? What's up, Guinness Speaks? Thanks for joining. Hilldog is here. Thanks for joining. Guinness Speaks. So many puppets. Yep, we're going to talk about the puppets. Would love some clarity. Let's go. Yeah, I think we all need a lot of clarity, but maybe this is the wrong type of clarity. Dr. Doka's here. It's been a rough first week back in the fiat mines. It'd be nice to hear some good news today. I mean, it could be worse. It could be worse. Guinness Speaks says 8 up about 10% from this morning. That's good news. That's a good point. That's a good point. The price action, kind of based on people misunderstanding what's going on, sort of, maybe is positive. 8-day eclipse, banks win, people lose. Yep, kind of. Emilio says, let's go. Otis Fricho says, love the title, hate that it's true. Let's go. Pucky Hawk's here. Hello. Troll Toll is here. Michael is here. Let's go. Michael says, fiat mine's destroying my soul. I'll soon be back with you. I hate it. Not with you specifically, but back in the fiat mines generally. Master of puppets. Yep. Tony Gam says all those puppets look like they illegally crossed the border. Yeah, they sort of, as soon as I created the image, I tried to redo it because they looked a little too much like the puppets in Team America World Police, but I couldn't. For some reason, the AI wanted them to look that way. Michael is here. Hilldog says, okay, so I asked Ivan on Tech today's thoughts on Midnight. He said he didn't like when a project comes out with another token like Hex to Pulse. Curious your thoughts. I think it's the only way you can have a layer verse. I think you can't really have a layer verse unless you have a universe of layers, and you're probably going to need a universe of assets to live on that universe of layers. So if you want a layer verse, you got to have multiple layers, and those layers are going to have many tokens. Joe Davidson is here. We're live. Yes, we are. Crypto Invasion says, let's go. Blue Mammal, let's go. Joe Davidson says, I almost went to get McDonald's, then saw you were going live and decided to make steak instead. Nice. I support that decision strongly. Bindocam, dinner and spies. Let's do it. Hilldog. Guinness Speaks is Hilldog. F Ivan. Ivan, if you're listening, it's not me who said that. Just so you know, it's not me who said that. Sub-Zero's here. At Cardano is here. Mark Going is here. Banks have the power. Let's go. True. Skipperton says, what the heck are we doing anyway? Okay. Here's what we're doing, guys. So the big lie that has persisted in crypto for a long time is that the biggest blockchains are decentralized when they're fucking not. Their Nakamoto coefficients fucking suck, and they don't have centralized governance. Explain to me, and I don't mean you guys explain to me, I'm reciting what a bunch of fucking senators probably asked A16Z when this shit was being written. Explain to me how the fuck Ethereum and Bitcoin are decentralized when their Nakamoto coefficients fucking suck and they don't have any decentralized governance. And we already know what the answer to those questions were. The answer is going to be, well, Bitcoin does have decentralized governance because the miners can point their rigs at whatever chain they want. We saw this during the block size war. They pointed their rigs at Bitcoin. That was governance, right? That's some bullshit governance because they've only got a fucking Nakamoto coefficient of 2 or 3 or whatever the fuck it is right now. It's single digit, very low. Then with Ethereum, we have a slightly more nuanced but equally lame argument. And the equally lame argument is, well, we have rough consensus. The the whole community is involved, and the senators are like, why don't you guys have any fucking voting? Some of the senators were probably like, I've held Ethereum for years, never been asked to vote on a single fucking thing. And the answer was like, oh, rough consensus. Here's the problem. Let's just jump ahead real quick. So if you ask the average person, in crypto, who's running Ethereum, they'll be like, well, the Ethereum Foundation, right? That's a problem for decentralization. if you can't really say it's decentralized governance, if the Ethereum Foundation is running Ethereum, and we know this was true as of a year ago, Vitalik, Vitamin Butters, told you who gets to appoint people to the Ethereum Foundation leadership. He was pissed at everybody. He said, no, this is not how this game works. This is less than a year ago. This is January 21st, 2025, 5 million views. So it's not like this is a secret. This was not an obscure announcement. The person deciding the new EF leadership team is me. One of the goals of the ongoing reform is to give the EF a proper board. But until that happens, it's me. He told us right here who is deciding the new EF leadership team. It's Vitamin Butters. There's no fucking decentralized governance in Ethereum. That's the problem. The decentralization is a fucking puppet show, right? In Ethereum, they even have to claim, oh, it's rough consensus between a lot of core devs and, ecosystem participants. And the Ethereum Foundation does some coordinating, but they don't, direct the progression of the blockchain. You're like, well, who the fuck does then? Who the fuck is directing the progression of the ecosystem? Because it sure as fuck seems like it's the Ethereum Foundation, and they're appointed by Vitalik. He told us a year ago. So this is the lie that had to be reconciled here. The lie is that this is what the decentralization looks like. It's a fucking puppet show among the biggest blockchains. Then you've got Cardano. Cardano has actual decentralization, actual decentralized governance. We don't have a fucking Nakamoto coefficient of 3. We have a good Nakamoto coefficient. Everything's decentralized. So the problem with these lies is that when you go to a bunch of senators who aren't idiots and they start asking these questions, the senators suddenly realize they're not going to be able to have a bill that says the standard is decentralization, even though that's what all the rhetoric in crypto ever has said. The standard is going to have to be something other than decentralization. The lies got to be made true because you can't get an entire Senate, you can't get all the senators to vote for something that requires as much cognitive dissonance as would be required by saying that Bitcoin and Ethereum are decentralized, because they're not fucking decentralized. It's a fucking puppet show. But it wasn't people thinking about things like that who were in there doing all the lobbying. It was the guys with the big money. It was the A16Zs. It was the Coinbases. It was the bankers. The voice that was not able to be voiced was the voice of decentralization. People who would have said, hey, guys, we have metrics for decentralization, and they're pretty fucking straightforward. How many validators control the network? Is there any goddamn decentralized governance or not? These are pretty simple things that any governor, any senator would understand. Any common sense human being would understand. They couldn't do that. They knew the senators would never swallow that lie. So they had to come up with a new lie. We're going to talk about what the new lie is in just a second here. let's hit the comments a little bit. Bindo Cam says, here, have some Benjis and shut up. That's pretty much what's happening. If the bear market ends when the last holder capitulates, banks aren't ready for ADA. If the bear market ends when the last holder capitulates, banks aren't ready for ADA. True, banks are not ready for ADA. Lone Eagle's here. Michael says, I like how Charles calls Ethereum a Ponzi. I wholeheartedly agree. The other shitcoins too. Matt, what's up? Thanks for joining. Brian Packard says, good evening. Ruandre says, good pump today. If we continue like this, we'll be over $1 when this month ends. That would be nice. That'd be super nice. Mission Zambia, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining. So let's talk about what the lie is. Of course, let's get some good news before we talk about how shitty this bill is. It's not totally shitty. It could be worse. But yes, Mission Zambia hit it on the head. Hello, 42 cents. That is so nice to see. I didn't think it would go any other way. I don't think any of us did. We kind of knew. And we're going to talk about exactly what that is. But let's go through the sequence of events here. Let's go through the sequence of events, and then we'll hit the bill so we can really talk about this bill. So one of the best crypto attorneys in DC is Jake Chervinsky. I knew we had trouble when this was the first thing I saw this morning. The new market structure bill text came out last night. A lot has changed since the draft that came out in September, and the devil is in the details. That sounded like trouble. Amendments are due by 5 p.m. Eastern, so it's a mad scramble today, identifying critical issues to fix in markup. Sadly, there are many. Also sounded bad. This is kind of what you expect, but sounded pretty bad. Hello, Ruandre. Thank you for joining. James is here. Matt is here too. Okay, so this is what the bill looks like. It's called Digital Asset Market Clarity Act. So we can quit calling it the market structure bill or whatever euphemism people have been using to refer to it. This is just the Senate version of the Clarity Act. You know how it goes. The Senate figures out what they can swallow. Then they go back and reconcile with the House. Then it goes to the president's desk. When that's going to happen, we don't know. So let's just talk about some big themes. And this is a 278-page document. Obviously, there would be no way to get through all of that and give you a good take in the amount of time that's available today. So just like everybody else, we're going to rely on some AI interpretation here. But I think the AI did an okay job. I think all the AI interpretations of the bill or summaries of the bill I saw today did an okay job. But we're gonna fill in some nuance by looking directly at the bill in a second. So here are the important things to note. So first of all, this is just after our cursory review. This is based on AI. Don't rely on this for any reason. Don't make any economic bets based on what we're about to talk about. This is preliminary, cursory. More in detail research needs to be done. So don't make any bets based on what we're about to talk about. But here's some information for discussion only. The draft divides the crypto world into network tokens, ancillary assets, and tokenized financial instruments. And if you've followed the discussions we've had on this channel about the previous drafts, and we've talked about fucking all of them, you're already sort of correlating this in your head with some of the previous categories. These aren't that different. There's some very different nuances, but these categories, are going to seem pretty common sense to you once you see what they actually are. So network tokens, ancillary assets, and tokenized financial instruments. Ada Fox is here. Thanks for joining, Ada Fox. Appreciate you being here. I'm going to take that off the screen just so you guys can see. So network token. A token qualifies as a network token if it's a digital commodity. So this is the commodities category. This is the one that you want to be in. And you're probably guessing correctly. Tokenized financial instruments is going to be the securities one you do not want to be in. That you don't want to be in. We'll talk about this. According to this bill, we needed that 2 weeks ago. According to this bill, we needed that 2 weeks ago. We'll get to that though. Okay, so what is a network token? And here's where the fuckery begins. So you want to see decentralization here, and the AI kind of does trick itself into using the word decentralization. But we're going to look at the actual bill in a second. So just keep that in mind. Put that in your back pocket. So a token qualifies as a network token. That is, if it's a digital commodity, that is intrinsically linked to a distributed ledger system directly related to the system's functionality, operations, or services, derives or is reasonably expected to derive its value primarily from the use, adoption, or performance of that system. That's probably the most important of these bullet points. Provides governance capabilities or relates to decentralized governance. That's the AI freestyling a little bit. It must not include disqualifying financial rights. This is important. So it can't have these disqualifying financial rights. If you're the holder of the token, you shouldn't have these following rights. Why? Because that makes it a tokenized financial instrument. So you can't have debt or equity interests or options thereon. You can't have liquidation rights. You can't have entitlements to payments or transfers of value, except in decentralized governance context. You can't have financial interests in persons other than decentralized governance. You can't have interests in investment companies or entities that would qualify as such. You can't have interests in non-investment companies primarily holding non-security assets. So those are some of the things you can't have. Those are some of the things that would make it a tokenized financial instrument. So we're going to get to yield. We'll get to that. Rulo, hola. Thank you for joining. Okay. What are the ramifications of this? As you guessed, all the things that come with not being a security. Secondary market trading does not require registration, generally falls under commodities regulations, minimal ongoing requirements beyond anti-fraud and anti-manipulation. That's great because you're always going to be subject to anti-fraud and anti-manipulation rules. This is just saying, hey, there's not much else. It's just don't be fraudulent or manipulative. Gratuitous distributions are presumed non-security. What are these? Airdrops. So if you airdrop something, it's not a security. Pre-existing court rulings on similar assets may bind regulators. Okay, fair enough. Certification process available for rebuttal presumption of non-ancillary status. Okay, we'll come back to this. First, let's talk about ancillary assets. So the big thing to take away from this is you can fall out of network token status if you do any of this tokenized financial instrument stuff, right? If it really looks like you're taking an equity interest in something or a debt interest in something, if it looks like a stock, a synthetic stock or something like that, obviously you're going to fall out of network token status. And this is the big one: derives or is reasonably expected to derive its value primarily from the use, adoption, or performance of the system. And you're going to notice the nomenclature is the biggest red flag here. It's the biggest tip off that this is going to be fucked up. Guess how many times they mention the word blockchain in the entire 278-page draft? They mention blockchain 3 fucking times. Think about this. This is the biggest bill ever regulating blockchains. They only mention blockchains 3 times in 278 pages. That's only in the title to a section. It's not even operative language. It's just the fucking title to a section. They didn't even need to use the word blockchain in the operative language in that section. Consensus is only mentioned 7 times. Stake pools are mentioned 0 times. Miners are mentioned 0 times. Mining is mentioned 1 time. Validators are mentioned 7 times. Nodes are mentioned 9 times. Ask yourself, how can you even talk about blockchains or decentralization on blockchains if you hardly use any of those words? It's because, and they only mention decentralized governance, which to me is one of the fundamental pillars of decentralization in blockchain ecosystems. They only mention that 9 times in 278 pages. It's because this fucking bill is not about decentralization. That's the big thing. It's not about decentralization. They like to use these terms: ancillary asset originator, ancillary asset. They use the term ancillary asset 224 times. They talk all about network tokens. They're using these other labels because they're excising all the language about decentralization. They don't want it to be about decentralization because there's no way to make that lie true in a way that people would swallow. There's no way to make it true. You can't figure out a way to make a Nakamoto coefficient of 2 or 3 sound decentralized. It fucking sucks, and everybody can see it who's not already in that ecosystem. So Matt says, I think Charles made a good point 4 months ago when he said that every wrench they throw in the bill, we will fix it and we will win. Yeah, we're going to win. Cardano is not the most fucked. Cardano is not the most fucked by this bill, by the way. Some other ecosystems are deeply fucked. They are Diddy fucked. They are Diddy freak off fucked. That's how bad some of these other ecosystems are going to be under this bill. Cardano, not so much because we're actually decentralized, but we don't get a free ride like a lot of other ecosystems do. Mission Zebby says, well, I guess I can't listen to this one at the breakfast table. This is definitely not going to be a breakfast table one. They only care about their tokens, CBDC, stablecoins, etc. This bill is to keep fat cats fat. Yep. Picking winners and losers. How are they going to sell us on that? We're going to get to the worst part of it. This isn't even, this is the easy part so far. So, okay, so we've got these two categories, network token, ancillary tokens. So ancillary tokens. An ancillary token is basically a subset of network tokens, but so the token otherwise meets network token criteria, but its value is dependent on the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of the ancillary asset originator or a related person. So instead of, we set up here a network token, it derives its value primarily from the use, adoption, or performance of the system. See, they couldn't even use the word blockchain there because they only use it 3 times in the entire fucking bill. Instead of it being that, though, its value is dependent on the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of the ancillary asset originator. So they didn't want to use decentralization language, the most defining characteristic of blockchains and crypto, decentralization. They didn't want to use that. So they said, is the value derived from the blockchain, a word they also don't use, or is the value derived from the efforts of a centralized entity or person, right? So they don't want to use the native language of crypto. They want to use this other language, but they also leave it super, super vague, right? Because here's the problem. Here's why they have to leave it super fucking vague. Because we know giant blockchains that have a huge amount of money invested in them, like Ethereum, they have a problem, right? They have a problem. Everything in Ethereum is basically, it depends on what verb you want to use here, coordinated, managed, something. The Ethereum Foundation is doing something. And the ancillary asset originator is certainly Vitamin Butters. He is the guy. He's the ancillary asset originator in Ethereum. No question about that. And if he appoints somebody to this Ethereum Foundation leadership team, that person is probably some kind of a related person to him. So they talk about related persons in the actual bill. I think even this AI rundown talks about related persons. So, here we go. Ancillary asset. Its value is dependent on the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of the ancillary asset originator or a related person, right? So Ethereum would have a huge problem here. So ramifications, potentially treated as involving an investment contract. You know what that is? That's Howey language that leads to you being a security. So treated as involving an investment contract in initial sales, or if not properly managed, subject to tailored disclosure requirements. You know what these are? These are those SEC filings, initial filings, periodic filings, semi-annual, annual filings, resale restrictions, typically 6 to 12 month holding periods, may require registration or exemption. This is all security stuff. Intermediaries cannot list non-compliant ancillary assets, exemptions available for liquidity providers, agencies, higher regulatory burden. It's all securities. You're falling into the securities world here. So this is important. This acts as a transitional or hybrid category for tokens that start more centralized but may mature into pure network tokens. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So then the last category, and we're going to come back and talk about stablecoin yield and also about front ends on dApps. We'll also talk about what this bill does with those things, but we're hitting this category, this first, classification of assets. So the last category we've kind of already talked about. This refers to a digital representation of a traditional financial instrument, such as a security. So this is the synthetic Tesla stock, synthetic NVIDIA stock. We've seen this in crypto. We already know that's going to be fucking outlawed, no question. Derivative, commodity futures, swap options, or the regulated instruments. If it's something that is an obvious financial instrument and it's just tokenized on the blockchain, they tell you it's going to be treated identically to the underlying traditional instrument for all regulatory purposes. Just because it's on crypto, just because you're doing it on a blockchain, doesn't mean you can sell NVIDIA shadow stock, right? This is pretty obvious to me. So the real action is going to be between these two for actual crypto assets that aren't synthetic equities or things like that. It's really going to be, are you an ancillary asset, in which case you're at least temporarily a security, or are you a network token? Brown Beardo says, get the baby oil. Yep. Trump coin is a free ride. Gensler. Vitamin Butters. Victory. Omar, let's go. I sense a Charles rant incoming. Yeah, I'm sure Charles will have some things to say about this eventually, but who knows? Who knows? I think he's trying to stay off our part. He's trying to stay off X at least, but he didn't say he'd stay off YouTube. So I think we'll hear some things. Okay. So let's look at the actual definition of network token, just so you know that the AI is not like tricking you or something. Network token. This is the most open-ended definition ever for a reason. The term network token means a digital commodity that is intrinsically linked to a distributed ledger system and that derives, or is reasonably expected to derive, its value from the use of such distributed ledger system. Okay, that is so open-ended. Why in the world? We've seen previous drafts where they talked about decentralization so upfront. The most important thing was decentralization. We've even seen drafts previously. We've talked about all of them. We've talked about the Lummis Gillibrand drafts, the Fit 21 drafts. They were all fucking better than this one, because at least they would mention decentralization of validation, decentralization in governance, right? Those were all earlier drafts before the senators and the lobbyists figured out that those things would be a huge problem for, like decentralized governance. It's going to be hard to explain how miners being able to point their rigs at different chains is equivalent to real decentralized governance. It was going to be hard to explain how Vitalik appointing members to the Ethereum Foundation leadership team is equivalent to decentralized governance. So instead, they just shit canned the whole thing. It's like decentralization is out. That's out of style, guys. That's last season. No one is wearing the skinny pants anymore. The skinny pants are out. Matt says voting on a bill Thursday. Wow, I'm sure it will go smooth as silk Thursday. Yep. Fat cats again. How much you bet Charles coming in hot on YouTube? He should have a lot to say about this, because he spent a lot of time with Tim Scott, and this is Tim Scott's bill. JP Morgan chain can't thrive. Think about all the gerbs if we forget the bankers. Okay. So anyways, this is super general, right? When I first looked at this definition, it was obvious to me this is where everybody was going to fit. And then I looked at this definition, and how little they talked about network tokens throughout the entire bill, because they don't mention network tokens. It's a category that's used, but there's not as much fine-grained detail about it as I expected. And I couldn't figure out how they were selecting that approach until later on in the day. We saw this. People started talking about this. So this is clear down on page 97 of 278 pages. This little paragraph down here. This is the one that got people real excited today. It says, a network token shall not be considered to be an ancillary asset. So you remember, ancillary asset, the one that makes you at least temporarily a security, is considered a subset of this bigger category, network token. So you want to be a network token that's not also an ancillary asset. But they're saying a network token shall not be an ancillary asset. So you're in the good category, you're a commodity. If on January 1st, 2026, as soon as I read that, I got scared because I know when they lay out a date like that, a recent date, you know there's going to be some fuckery. If on January 1st, 2026, any units of that network token were the principal asset of an exchange traded product, the shares of which are listed and traded on a national securities exchange registered under Section 6 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. What does that mean? That means that one of the most decentralized blockchains, which didn't happen to have its network token as a principal asset of an ETP that's actively actually being traded on a national securities exchange on January 1st, 2026, such a blockchain like Cardano is not getting the free ride that these blockchains are. So basically what that section is saying is that these blockchains are getting a free ride. It's like, no matter what else is in this entire bill, by the way, anything that meets this requirement is automatically a network token, automatically gets the good category, regardless of anything else. Just like fuck everybody else. We're going to have this huge open-ended definition that doesn't even really address decentralization. Fuck decentralization. Let's just come up with something really tricky that pulls in Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I thought they would just fucking list Bitcoin and Ethereum. We've seen previous drafts that did that. I think maybe even the Gillibrand, one of the Gillibrand Lummis drafts, just straight up said Bitcoin and Ethereum. This one, I think they thought this would be a little more palatable because, and they have a good practical point. If something's already trading on a national securities exchange, it's pretty tough to turn around and say, oh, that one can't be trading like this in secondary markets. All of a sudden, it's falling into this bad category. You know, stop the presses. Actually, we fucked up. We got to reverse this one. Obviously, they can't do that. And so I think they just really wanted to pull in BTC and ETH, but these other ones are kind of getting a free ride. The rest of these are sort of getting a free ride. So what happens? What happens if you are not in this free ride category? So Sub-Zero says, taking decentralization out of the picture, you might as well have a CBDC or close to it. Michael says ADA in the NASDAQ. Crazy Doge, but not ADA. What the hell? We work twice as hard. Where's our rally? Yeah. So, okay. So what happens if you don't get a free ride and you think you're a network token, but you're unclear? We haven't really addressed that. Like we talked about, we looked at the definition, like what is a network token, right? That definition up on what page was it? Page 20-ish, maybe it was over here. Yeah. We looked at this definition on page 20. It gives this really vague definition, right? It's like every fucking token in the world is going to argue they fit this. They're all going to argue their value is intrinsically linked to a distributed ledger system. So there must be more detail in here describing exactly how all this works. So if we go to page 26, I won't make you guys suffer through all the scrolling. If we go to page 26 here, we go to page 26. Let's see if I can, am I in the right place? Am I in the right place? Okay. Prior certification. In general, for purposes of this section, there shall be a rebuttable presumption, and we've seen this language before, right? You know where this is headed if you followed the earlier discussion on this channel, earlier discussion of earlier drafts. For purposes of the section, there should be a rebuttable presumption that a network token, including a network token distributed in the manner described in paragraph 3, there's a rebuttable presumption. That means you can rebut that presumption. You can argue successfully that the presumption is not correct. You can remove the presumption through argument. So a rebuttable presumption is an ancillary asset unless the originator of that network, so it's a rebuttable presumption that a network token, so even if you are a network token, there's a presumption that you're also an ancillary asset. So that means you fall into the bad category. You're not a clear commodity, you are subject to all the security stuff. So there's a presumption that you're subject to all the security stuff unless the originator of that network token, so the issuer, submits to the commission a completed certification supported by reasonable evidence as defined by the commission, sufficient to demonstrate that the network token is not an ancillary asset. We've seen this before. So before, it was sort of this thing. Some of the previous drafts we saw in the preceding years, they had all this language that said like, hey, here's what you have to satisfy to be in the clear. If you satisfy all these things, you're in the clear. And Cardano was in the clear on a lot of those because we're so decentralized. Here, what they're doing is they're saying, oh, if you're one of those chosen few, if you're one of these chosen few, you already fit. The presumption is already rebutted just by fiat. And here I mean fiat, like someone declaring something, not fiat currency. Just by fiat, you are in the clear, right? But if you're not part of that chosen list, if you're not one of the winners we just picked, then there's automatically this presumption that you are an ancillary asset, and you've got to go through all the bullshit of proving you're not an ancillary asset. So in the previous bills, the way it worked was there was clear defining characteristics, and if you didn't meet those characteristics, then you had to go through this process. So Cardano was probably going to get off the hook on a lot of those. And here they're like, nope, it's just this list of who happen to have an ETP as of January 1st. And if you're not on that list, you probably fall into this. There's this presumption, and you got to do the certification. So what's in the certification? Face it, guys, we hate Doge. Network token, that's funny. Yep. Doge is a fucking meme. Jesse D. Yep. Doge is a fucking meme. So what is the presumption? So you can find the certification. What is the certification? You can find the certification on page 51. So if we go to page 51, you can find the damn certification. It's like at the bottom of 51. Or let's see, is it up here? Certification. Here you go. Page 50, really. Bottom of page 50. Okay, the certification. A certification covered party may submit to the commission a certification based on the knowledge of the certification covered party. So in our case, let's face it, this would be IOG. IOG is one of the originators of the ADA asset. They're one of the founding entities. It could probably be, with prior drafts, we've kind of concluded the consensus has been that probably any of the founding entities could have done it because they were all kind of originators. But let's face it, we know who would do it. It would be IOG. So clearly American clarity. Now give us your lunch money. Dolphy Wolf, you're right. You're right. They do know that Doge is a meme. Yep. It's those other ecosystems, they didn't pick them based on their characteristics. They just wanted some way to say ETH plus Bitcoin without just straight up saying ETH plus Bitcoin. And those other ones just happen to get to go along for the ride. They just happen to get to go along for the ride. So I'm sure some VCs were very pleased. They were very, very pleased to see some of these in there, especially Solana. The fact that Solana was in there probably pleased a lot of parties, probably a lot of people. So, okay, back to what has to go in the certification. So here's the silver lining. Here's the silver lining for Cardano. We fit the certification. The certification is good for us. We can actually hit the certification marks. We can surmount the certification hurdle pretty damn easily. A lot of other blockchains are going to have trouble with this, and they're going to have to do all the periodic reporting and the security stuff and all the disclosures. They're going to have to do all that stuff. Cardano is going to be able to hit the certification pretty easily. And don't forget, there were going to be a bunch of amendments to this. Amendments were due at 5 p.m. Eastern today. So this is as I'm speaking on, what is it, Tuesday? Is it Tuesday today? I think it's Tuesday. Yep, Tuesday. Losing track of the days. So a bunch of amendments came in. We'll talk about the exact number in just a couple seconds, but a lot of amendments came in today. So what we're seeing today is not what we're going to see on Thursday. What will be changed? We don't know. Anyways, the certifications. During the 1-year period preceding the certification covered party, this would be like the IOG or whoever, engaged in not more than a nominal level of entrepreneurial or managerial efforts as determined by the commission by rule. So what does this mean? This means the SEC is going to have to come up with their own rules about what is too much entrepreneurial or managerial efforts, right? The good thing, Cardano, of course, is going to point to the fact that the DReps are now managing the blockchain, right? IOG doesn't have any goddamn keys that control anything on the chain. They can't take money out of the treasury. They can't decide who develops what. The DReps are deciding everything. So IOG doesn't really engage in any managerial efforts. They've been largely working on Midnight, and Midnight has some connections to Cardano, but only really that, the Night token lives on Cardano. So, there'd be some discussion there about entrepreneurial efforts, and whether the work on Midnight, was entrepreneurial as per Cardano, those kind of things. And there's a whole other discussion about what would have to have happen in Midnight for Midnight to be able to make this certification like a year from now. But we're just going to talk about Cardano tonight. And any such efforts were not a primary factor in determining the value of the related ancillary asset. So you can see why Midnight is going to have to wait a while to make this kind of certification. So we have some exceptions, except that providing administrative services shall not alone be considered entrepreneurial or managerial efforts for the purpose of this clause. So you can tell they've completely changed the metric from decentralization to, is the value of the token related to, activity on the chain, or is it related to the activities of some central party? More certifications. That the certification covered party does not reasonably expect there to be any efforts that would render the certification covered party unable to provide a new certification following the date of the certification. So they're not going to do anything immediately in the future that would make their certification untrue. Substantially all material information that is reasonably expected to contribute to the value of the ancillary asset offered, sold, or distributed to the public is reasonably expected to be available to the public. So it's all on this question of whether or not there's some centralized party doing anything entrepreneurial or managerial, related to the blockchain or the assets, right? This is a brand new way to look at the world, because they couldn't make the lie true about decentralization in Bitcoin and Ethereum. A common sense senator, some 80-year-old senator isn't going to look at a Nakamoto coefficient of 3 and be convinced that that's decentralization, because it doesn't sound like decentralization, because it's not. So they came up with this brand new metric about entrepreneurial and managerial efforts of, basically the ancillary asset originator, just the issuer of whatever the asset is. So in our case, we know who that is. And, a lot of people feeling like IOG was walking away from Cardano was really IOG preparing for this. IOG wanted to be able to say, hey, the whole and we've talked about this many times on this channel, the whole ecosystem, Cardano ecosystem, is being governed by the DReps. We're not doing anything. The DReps can hire whoever they want to engage in entrepreneurial efforts. The DReps themselves are engaging in the managerial efforts. We're not doing it, right? Cardano can make that argument. Think about all the blockchains that do not have decentralized governance. How in the hell are they going to make this argument? Like, I don't want to single out any blockchains right now. You guys can do that yourselves. But if you just go ask Grok. Go ask Grok. Like, who's not going to be able to make it? And I would argue that very strongly that some of these would definitely not make it. And in fact, when I asked Grok named some of these, saying they would not make the cut. They wouldn't be able to make that certification the SEC would not accept their certification. That's basically what Grok was telling me about a bunch of these and many other blockchains. Cardano has got this great thing going with our decentralized governance. It really helps with this certification. A lot of other blockchains would have huge problems with this. I contend even Ethereum, how are they going to argue that the Ethereum Foundation, which is all appointed by, and we know as recently as 12 months ago, the Ethereum Foundation leadership team was being appointed by the ancillary asset originator. How are they going to argue that the Ethereum Foundation is not engaging in managerial efforts? Who the fuck is managing the upgrades if not the Ethereum Foundation, right? Pretty hard for people to swallow that argument. So they just opted them in. They just grandfathered them in. Grokopedia is crazy good now. Yep. This draft looks like a bunch of VCs got together and said, okay, guys, what tokens you want? Yep, very much. This draft looks like it was written by amateurs. Make us feel better, please. Yep. Grok states the top 3 and most secure blockchains are BTC, ETH, ADA. Yeah, I mean, how many times is security mentioned in this, right? It's part of the blockchain trilemma. Let's see. Security. Okay. They do talk about security. That's good. Oh no, it's because they're talking about securities, as in securities law. So they did mention cybersecurity, though. There was a mention of cybersecurity somewhere in there. So that's a good sign. Security was mentioned. Wow, I hope there isn't a bias against Cardano. Yeah, most of those are so centralized. I don't think it's going to be straightforward. I don't think there is. I mean, certainly if they're talking to like an A16Z, if A16Z is lobbying some senator, they're going to talk shit about us for sure. I mean, not necessarily A16Z. So let's take away A16Z. Let's say VCs. There's never been any VC money in Cardano proper. There have been projects that have taken VC money, but there's not really been much VC money at all in Cardano, the Cardano ecosystem, and none in the protocol itself. So VCs as a group are going to talk shit about Cardano, but I don't think that's really what's going on here. I think what's really going on here, I think we got that list. In what page was it? The page 90, the list produced by the page 98 section. So the page 98 section is this section, network tokens, this thing that goes through network tokens and says they have to have been part of they have to have been the primary asset of an ETP that was already trading on January 1st. This list, I think they really just wanted to take in BTC and ETH in a way that didn't sound like they were just grandfathering in BTC and ETH. And then there's also a ton of money in Solana. You know, I mean, they probably considered just mentioning Bitcoin and Ethereum, you know, directly. But there's so much money in Solana now. This is probably a VC invention. Hey, why don't you just include everything that was trading as of January 2026, January 1st, 2026, because it would be a mess to have to unwind those that are already trading on national markets. That would be a mess. So just grandfather all of those in, right? You can imagine exactly how those conversations went. Probably the senators originally just wanted to grandfather these two in because they knew how much rage they would encounter if somehow Ethereum had to explain how it's decentralized or Bitcoin had to explain how it's decentralized. And I'm sure some VCs were like, oh, we can solve this problem for you so you don't have to mention those two directly and make it look like you're favoring them. And also, little bonus for us, we'll get Solana in there. And I think the rest of these are just kind of like along for the ride. XRP, they're big enough money. We already know they fought that huge case. They're probably pretty effective with the lobbying as well. But the rest of these, they kind of got a free ride. I'm not saying there's not VC money in some of these other ones, but some of these just kind of got lucky, I think. So ADA is the project that deserves the #1 spot. It's like a drama watching others have more clout. Yep. Is Mark Cuban still a fan? Who the hell knows the Mark Cuban? I don't know. That's why this draft is fucked up. Yep. Buy the rumor, sell the news. Cardano is the most secure blockchain along with BTC and ETH. The fact that it is not mentioned tells little me that the fuckery is deep. Old people like me have no business making laws about crypto. All my friends got no damn clue. Yeah, true. I would argue it's not even like, it's almost not even an age thing. It's just that you can't possibly understand how crypto works unless you're a part of crypto. And we've got a lot of people across generations in Cardano. So we have a lot of people in every age group who really understand it, but people who don't, I also would not put, a 22-year-old who doesn't understand, who's not inside crypto in charge of crypto legislation too. So ETH will never have to explain in the future their decentralization. If this is the draft that gets passed, no, they're just good. So basically, only 8 of the top 10 would remain without the fuckery. Is that right? I mean, what about BNB? What about BNB? Yeah, so I guess us and BNB. Who else? Let's see who else is in there. Tron, BNB, and Cardano get left out. That sucks. That sucks to be in the same category as Tron, BNB, and BNB. That definitely sucks. So, okay, so what's the upshot here? What's the upshot here? After scrambling to meet the 5 p.m. deadline, that was 7 hours ago. That was like 7 hours ago, I think. Senators on the banking committee have submitted 137 amendments to last night's text. So there's hope. There's hope. These are senators on the banking committee. So just the senators on the banking committee, because this is all happening inside the banking committee. Senators on the banking committee have submitted 137 amendments. Some of these will be debated during Thursday's markup. So here's where you can watch it. Go to her channel and you'll find this link, or just go to banking.senate.gov and you'll find this link and you can watch this. I believe this is going down at 10 a.m. Eastern on Thursday. So we can only hope that, Cardano is doing some kind of lobbying on this. I hope that other people are doing some lobbying. It's like, is this fair? No, this is not fair at all. Would Cardano be as fucked as some other ecosystems? Not at all. We're much better off. We're much better off than a lot of the other ecosystems. We would actually be able to make that certification. Is this a terrible standard to decide what's a security and what's a commodity? This standard that seems to avoid talk of decentralization at all costs. Yes, this is a terrible standard. I would prefer they just make decentralization the standard and then just grandfather in Bitcoin and Ethereum. I would rather, Lummis and Gillibrand did that. They just said Ethereum and Bitcoin, gave them as examples. I believe it was like a parenthetical, like, for example, Bitcoin and Ethereum, mentioning that they're both decentralized enough. And then they just went on to make decentralization the standard, which is kind of an intellectual conceit. But I would rather have that intellectual conceit than this terrible thing. So we're not as fucked as some other ecosystems that are not going to be able to make the certifications. Like Justin Sun, good luck with Tron. Good luck making those certifications for Tron. So we're not as fucked as some of the others, but it's like Cardano is so much more decentralized, right? It's like, if anybody should be getting a pass on these, it should be Cardano. But I don't even want for anybody to get a pass. I just want you to lay out standards. Just lay out actual standards that relate to actual decentralization and let us meet those standards or not. Don't make it everybody's an ancillary asset unless you're one of these that we picked. This is truly picking winners and losers. We're going to pick these, how many winners was it? Let's get the exact number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to pick 8 winners and everybody else has to go through this bullshit certification process. Is it the end of the world? No. Cardano would just do it and we would pass. We'd be fine. But is it like we're starting a 100-meter race 50 meters back? Yes. Yes, it is. Cardano is genius. The other coins are respected in the concept, but ADA is so next level. True. Yeah, no pass. All must prove which category they fall in. Yeah, I mean, that's even if you just lay out the categories and you grandfather Bitcoin and Ethereum in, fine. Like, we knew they were going to do that. We knew they were going to do that, but it's like this is just not the right way to do it. Decentralization needs to be the criteria, not this bullshit, roundabout way to ask, is there a central party, right? Is there a central party doing all the stuff, right? They should just talk about decentralization. The problem with desensitization is they cannot seize the assets unless it is an exchanged, less controlled by government. Okay. So anyways, that's what we're dealing with. But let's go back now. So that's just one part of this. That's just one part of this, the classification of the assets. This is a big bill. It's dealing with everything in crypto. That's not all there is. There's also the stablecoin yield issue. So here's what Grok had to say. The draft primarily regulates payment stablecoins. General stablecoins without this designation may fall under broader network token ancillary asset rules where yield could trigger security status if it creates disqualifying financial rights. So the financial rights we talked about above, the things that make something a tokenized financial instrument, they're going to tie into this approach to stablecoins. Too long didn't read. The bankers won. Coinbase lost. The core provisions on yield appear in section 404. This section balances innovation, allowing certain incentives with protections against deposit-like features. You can tell that's like Grok being very pro this decision in favor of the bankers. So prohibited yield. Let's get to the meat of it. Prohibited yield. Passive or holding only yield. Explicitly banned. So USDC can't say, hey, if you just hold USDC, you get 8% per year. They can't do that. So here's a direct quote. A digital asset service provider may not pay any form of interest or yield. So a digital asset service provider cannot pay any form of interest or yield, whether in cash, tokens, or other considerations, solely in connection with the holding of a payment stablecoin. So you can't be paid yield just for holding it. This prohibits passive returns tied purely to possession, for example, automatic interest accrual without user activity. Rationale prevents stablecoins from mimicking insured bank deposits or creating uninsured yield-bearing products that could pose systemic risks. That's exactly what we want to fucking do. We want to disintermediate the banks. That's exactly what Satoshi was trying to do. He was trying to disintermediate the banks. That is the whole point of crypto. That's all we're trying to do. The bankers just beat Coinbase on this. Misrepresentations. Prohibited to market any compensation as risk-free or comparable to interest paid on a bank deposit. So the bankers wanted to maintain this perception that crypto is risky, especially with stablecoins. They don't want to lose their savings account business. They don't want to lose that. Banks don't want to lose that. That was this whole fight. So what yields are allowed? Activity-based rewards. This sounds like it sucks already. So permitted if tied to active participation rather than mere holding. So you can't have passive yield. We don't want you to have passive income, they're saying. Exceptions to the prohibition include rewards or incentives linked to transactions, payments, or transfers using the stablecoin, use of a wallet or platform, loyalty programs. We don't want fucking loyalty programs. Thank you. We do not. I said it the other night. It sounds like what they want us to have are frequent flyer miles. Rebates or incentives for merchant acceptance, providing liquidity or collateral. So at least they're allowing you to use stable coins for liquidity. I guess that's helpful. It's not much though. Governance, staking, or ecosystem participation. These must be transparent and not centralized in a way that creates investment contract expectations. Third-party rewards allowed if independent. So here's a little light of day for the Coinbases of the world, but not much. Direct quote. A permitted payment stablecoin issuer shall not be deemed to pay interest or yield solely because a third party independently offers rewards. What's the problem with this for Coinbase? Coinbase has a percentage interest of Center, which is the issuer of USDC. They own part of the issuer of USDC. So they're not just a third party. They are, in fact, part owner of the permitted payment stablecoin issuer. I don't know the current status of that. That was reported in one of those articles I showed on the channel the other day. I haven't gone back and verified exactly how much of Center Coinbase currently may or may not own, so don't take that as fact, but that's what's being reported in the press. I remember back in the day, it was very prominently reported, I believe, on the Center website. I think Center had a website, or maybe it was a part of the Circle website that said that Coinbase was a part of Center, and Center was the, Coinbase and Circle together were Center, and Center was the issuer of USDC. So I don't know if that's still true, but if it is, and it seems like it is, then that's a problem for Coinbase and paying yield. Issuer directed third party yields would likely violate the prohibition. So Center can't even direct Coinbase to pay a yield. So broader bill provisions permit rules-based distributions like staking rewards as a programmatic result of validating or staking activity if decentralized without centralized control and not constituting investment contracts. So staking rewards, okay. So ramifications to this whole stablecoin yield thing. Issuers and digital asset service providers must clearly state that payment stablecoins are neither an investment product nor a deposit. Coinbase is going to love that. Having to tell people that their stablecoins are not an investment product or a deposit. They want people to believe they're very much both of those things. Not insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Okay, that's fair. It's not FDIC insured. Then you should have to say that. Compensation programs must be reported. There's ramifications of violations. And this whole distinction, yield-bearing stablecoins not qualifying as payment stablecoins and are going to be evaluated under network token ancillary asset criterias, passive yield dependent on originator efforts, likely ancillary assets. It's all like the banks won. This is all very much like the banks won and Coinbase lost. No wonder Coinbase was threatening to pull its support of this bill the other day. Is there a pro Cardano senator that's going to make an amendment? Never heard of that guy. So the guy who I saw Charles talking to the most was Tim Scott. It was Tim Scott. Here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. This whole bill to be proposed by Mr. Scott. Tim Scott, this is his bill. He's the chairman. He's the chairman of the committee, and it's his bill. And he's the guy that Charles seemed to spend a lot of, I saw a lot of pictures of Charles like talking to him, a lot of mention of him. So I thought he was going to be our Cardano senator, but apparently that was not as effective as I would have hoped. Omar Wright says, listen to you for too long. Thanks for verifying what was understood. Yeah. Is this bill even legal with all the, oh yeah, it is the law. So if it gets passed. So like I said, though, don't forget, this is important. This is just the first draft that's being unveiled to the public. The senators on the committee did not like this as much as we didn't like it because they proposed 137 amendments, right? And there's a lot of stuff in here we haven't even talked about yet because, a lot of the senators on the banking committee, they had today to work on this thing. And, like those senators aren't reading 278 pages. They've got staffers going crazy trying to find stuff all day. And, this is what was done after, one day. But there's going to be a lot of amendments. We'll see what happens on Thursday. Honestly, it's kind of a terrible framework. Is it fatal for Cardano? Not at all. Cardano is far better off than most other blockchains. Does it suck that we weren't part of the picked winners? Yes. Costadoc says we need more Fibonaccios. I disagree, my friend. I disagree. Pretty funny though. So there's going to be a lot more, but let's talk now about what I think is also a very important part of this. So here's Grok going through how this affects dApps, because this isn't just like the classification of assets into commodities and securities. It's also not just what are we going to do about stablecoin yield. It's everything in crypto. So builders, people building stuff. A lot of people in Cardano are building stuff for Midnight right now, or for Cardano, or both. People who are building stuff for Cardano should really pay attention to this. There's some important shit in this section applying to the regulation of dApps, especially the regulation of the front end of dApps. So I'm going to go through the way Grok describes this. So the draft bill addresses dApp front ends. We're going to talk more about the front ends because I think it's a little more nuanced than some of the smart contract piece, right? So these are the websites you visit when you want to interact with a dApp, right? And we're assuming there's going to be a smart contract underlying this dApp. We kind of know the smart contract is deployed onto the blockchain. It's some code that's deployed onto the blockchain. And, in a permissionless blockchain like Cardano or Midnight, pretty much anybody can write a front end that interacts with that smart contract. And, some company or group or person, who created this dApp, they might decide that there's something that sucks about their original smart contract. So they might migrate to like a V2 of that smart contract and then deploy another one, because you can't really pull them back in a lot of cases, most cases. So they have to deploy a new smart contract. So we've got two different things going on: the smart contract underlying the dApp and the front end where you interact with the dApp. So right now we're going to talk more about the front end, because the smart contract, once you deploy it, it's out there. The front end is a little different because this is just some code running on a server, right? It's not actually on the blockchain in most cases. So talking about the front end, the draft bill addresses dApp front ends, user interfaces, websites, or web-hosted applications that enable interaction with decentralized applications, smart contracts, blockchain protocols, or DeFi trading protocols through a combination of targeted obligations and broad exemptions. The goal is to protect innovation in decentralized systems while mitigating illicit finance risks. Regulation turns on factors like centralization versus decentralization. Okay, good. Custody and control. This custody and control thing is going to come up a lot. US ownership and operation and functionality. Okay. So distributed, here are some terms they're going to use. Distributed ledger application layer. This is a web-hosted software application that allows users to create or submit instructions to a blockchain application or DeFi protocol. A DeFi trading protocol would be a fully automated, non-discretionary system without centralized custody or control. A decentralized governance system is, you already know what that is. So we know what it is because we all participate in one on Cardano. So they describe it pretty loosely, though: a rules-based, transparent governance, not controlled by any one person or group. Okay, so when are dApp front ends going to be regulated? So this is important, right? Because you probably don't want to be regulated if you're putting out a dApp. You don't want the front end to be regulated. So here's when they say they are going to be regulated. Okay, so it has to be US owned or operated web hosted front end. That'll be subject to treasury guidance. So why is this concerning? Why is it concerning when they say it's going to be subject to treasury guidance? So that's concerning because it means that treasury is going to pass some laws. You don't know when, you don't know what. The senators are just kind of saying, yeah, the Department of the Treasury will decide what that's going to be. So some of the requirements may be to use blockchain analytics to screen for sanctioned addresses. Okay, already you're screening for sanctioned addresses. This is a huge burden. Applies specifically to distributed ledger application layers that enable transaction submission to dApps or DeFi protocols. Does not apply to non-web hosted interfaces, self-hosted wallets, or core blockchain infrastructure. So this is not something that's going to apply to core blockchain infrastructure. You can imagine that as maybe like, stake pools, not going to apply to self-hosted wallets. Front ends with centralized custody or control. So these potentially could be classified as digital asset intermediaries requiring registration as broker-dealers. So totally sucks if you have centralized custody or control in the front end. Indirect obligations via regulated entities. If a registered intermediary uses the front end to interact with DeFi, the intermediary must perform risk assessments, money laundering, sanctions evasion, disclose risks to this is all terrible. Nobody in crypto wants to do any of this stuff. So if you are US owned or operated or US web hosted, if you have centralized control or custody, if you basically a whole bunch of things, you are in a land you don't want to be in. When DApp front ends are not regulated. So when it's just software development, publishing, and maintenance. No securities jurisdiction or registration solely for developing, publishing, compiling, or relaying code software for front ends. So this is something that would have to be looked at in pretty close detail because everybody obviously is going to argue that they're just developing, compiling, and maintaining, front end code. Explicit protection for open source or decentralized front end interfaces prohibits restricting deployment operation of dApps, First Amendment protections for publishing code. So this is going to require some discussion because you've got this whole category up here, and then you've got this whole thing if you're basically open source. So we're going to have to look at this in detail, and a lot of attorneys in crypto, especially attorneys dealing with DeFi projects, are going to be looking at all this stuff in really close detail. No jurisdiction for providing user interfaces that enable users to read and access blockchain data. So that one makes sense. If your software just allows users to read and access blockchain data, then it's basically like a blockchain explorer. So no jurisdiction there. Administering or maintaining decentralized governance messaging systems. Okay, makes sense. Facilitating smart contract interactions without control. That's pretty broad. The devil would be in the details there. Exempt from money transmitter registration if the provider lacks unilateral ability to control or effectuate transactions. That's pretty big. So this is something that, anybody building out a front end in Cardano, you definitely want to be exempt from money transmitter registration. So not having any kind of control, ability to control or effectuate transactions is going to be pretty important. This is all going to get real important. Non-custodial, self-custodial interfaces, self-hosted wallets or front ends where users retain independent control over assets are fully protected. No federal restrictions on self-custody. Good. We like that. Infrastructure and support roles exempt for running nodes, providing oracles, computational resources, or infrastructure support in decentralized systems. That's good. We want to be able to run nodes without being regulated. Voluntary cybersecurity standards available for DeFi front-end developers. Good faith compliance evidence. So this kind of makes sense. Grok thinks general principles here are no presumption of securities jurisdiction for decentralized activities, preempts inconsistent state laws. Okay. Grok says, in summary, truly decentralized non-custodial dApp front ends, especially those merely providing read access or non-controlling interaction, face minimal to no regulation beyond general anti-fraud rules. U.S. operated web-hosted interfaces face narrow AML sanctions obligations to address illicit finance. If you have to do blockchain forensics to make sure you're not dealing with an address that dealt with a sanctioned address, I wouldn't call that narrow. I would call that pretty burdensome. But bill leans heavily toward exemptions to foster DeFi innovation, protect developers, users. So anybody building in Cardano would want to look very closely at the text, and you're probably going to have to rely on good advice from a good attorney in this section because this is tricky and kind of new stuff. So people today were already scrutinizing the parts of the draft that basically require further rulemaking by regulatory agencies. A lot of people were talking about sections 301 and 302. So we also don't know if some of those sections are going to get fixed by the amendments that came in today by 5 p.m. Obviously, one day for the poor staff members of these senators to go through the entire bill and get all their amendments in, that's a little fast. So we're left with this kind of conundrum, right? Like we want the Clarity Act to get passed. We definitely do, but we don't want it to get passed expediently if that's going to lead to bad regulations. And there's a lot to go through here. Like, people, the regular, crypto people haven't even had a chance to understand what all this DeFi regulation is about. Like, it was enough work today just going in detail through the classification of the assets. Certainly the centralized exchanges like Coinbase, they were busy going through the stable coin yield thing for all the reasons we talked about yesterday. And hopefully the people building front ends in Cardano were going in detail through all the front end stuff. We all know they weren't. They're normal people just like us. Nobody got time to be reading 278 pages. So, and even if they did, it's like, what can you do about it? Is it worth going through it if you know it might change tomorrow? And it is going to change tomorrow because there were a ton of amendments. So we don't know where this is headed. Is this the best version of a market structure bill we've seen so far? Definitely not. I preferred some of the earlier versions. Some of the earlier versions between Fit 21 and the Lummis Gillibrand drafts and a bunch of those earlier drafts, there were better versions. There were better bills in there. This is not the best bill. This one, the banksters seem to have had a lot of influence. The whole VC crowd seems to have had a lot of influence. Somebody was joking today, the best question to ask your senator if they're on the banking committee was, who the hell wrote the bill? And that is a question you probably never get the answer to because constituents wouldn't like the answer. It is not your senator who wrote the bill. The Clarity Act is as aptly named as the big, beautiful bill. Good call. It certainly does not provide a huge amount of clarity. You want to make the US the crypto capital. This thing ain't doing that. I wish somebody cared more about my front end. We can all sympathize. I think we can all sympathize with that. The lawmakers own crypto themselves, so we have that on our side. Oh, that's a good point, Guinness Speaks. That's a good point. It is not actually a cryptocurrency bill. Yeah, I mean, to me, if the threshold is not very heavily centered on, no pun intended, on decentralization, right? If the dividing line, if the wall between commodity and security is not very heavily reliant on concepts of decentralization proper, then I think it's not really a crypto bill. Isn't another silver lining? It would have to go back to the House for final markup. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that would still have to happen, and I think so based on what we've seen so far, I think the House is more pro crypto than the Senate, which you would expect, right? You would kind of expect the House to be more tech friendly than the Senate, maybe even just based on average age. I don't know what the average ages right now are in the Senate or the House, but so maybe strike that. But just based on sort of the nature of the House and the Senate, I would guess that the House is more tech friendly. So, they would have their little get together and they would hash out the differences in the two bills. So there's a ways to go on this one. I think there's going to be, I think the amendments probably will be pretty massive. A lot of those amendments will come from not people who aren't crypto friendly. So a lot of the amendments might also try to make it worse. That's another issue that you have to think about. There are going to be amendments that attempt to make the bill worse than it is now, not better. So that's a thing too. So what else have we got? So you'll remember everybody went crazy because Jerome Powell put out his video saying Trump was basically engaging in a witch hunt because he wouldn't lower rates. So today or yesterday, the U.S. Attorney's Office, so this is the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney Office, says the U.S. Attorney's Office contacted the Federal Reserve on multiple occasions to discuss cost overruns and the chairman's congressional testimony, but they were ignored, necessitating the use of legal process, which is not a threat. The word indictment has come out of Mr. Powell's mouth, no one else's. None of this would have happened if they had just responded to our outreach. This office makes decisions based on the merits, nothing more, nothing less. We agree with the chairman of the Federal Reserve that no one is above the law, and that's why we expect his full cooperation. So they're saying they tried to talk to the Fed about the cost overruns and the chairman's congressional testimony, but they were ignored. So they went with grand jury subpoena. So a lot of people kind of implied that this might be the case, that maybe it was going to turn out that this wasn't a witch hunt and the DOJ was really just investigating, whether everything Powell said to Congress was accurate. So this poster says, "Oh, Jerome Powell's statement that he was threatened with a criminal indictment appears to be factually inaccurate. If you believe the statement from U.S. Attorney Pirro, which I do, Pirro's version matches reporting now coming out of the Washington Post, getting spicy." So we'll see what happens with Powell and all of that. So we've also got this. I haven't looked at the latest Polymarket read on this, but earlier today, things were not looking good on the Supreme Court decision on the tariffs. So this is kind of interesting. There's a level of drama here because Trump, whether it's just gamesmanship, I would call it brinksmanship in this case, or something else, he's been implying that if the court rules against the tariffs, the U.S. can't pay back the money anyways. So if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, but if it's true, it could just be brinksmanship. But if it's true, then that's a huge problem. So we'll see what happens. Apparently there's a chance we could get this decision from the Supreme Court tomorrow. We could get some kind of a ruling tomorrow. So I'm very curious to see what happens there. Okay, easier, cheaper to support House members. That's true. But does that weigh more heavily in favor of the bankers or of crypto? Because we've got Coinbase. We kind of got like A16Z. There's some deep pockets that are invested in crypto, deeply invested in crypto, but maybe not as many as TradFi. So I guess we'll find out if it goes back to the House and then they have their little get together where they kind of hash everything out. I guess we would find out. I guess we'd find out how much the House is on our side and how much they're on TradFi's side. But I think that is all of the news. This bill was definitely a disappointment. It was about as disappointing as I expected. I didn't expect for there to be so few mentions of decentralization. I didn't expect them to just sort of, cut decentralization out of the legislation like it was a tumor. That's kind of what they did. It's like they want to talk all about ancillary asset originators and their entrepreneurial and managerial efforts, but they don't want to talk about decentralization. That's because when you start talking about something like decentralization, you start asking, how do you measure it? And unfortunately, we have good metrics for those things. We have Nakamoto coefficients. We have, things like, even binary things like, is there decentralized governance or not? So unfortunately, because you can measure that one, they don't want it. They don't want measures of decentralization that can be measured. They want this, ephemeral stuff like, let's have a court decide, not even a court, let's have the SEC decide if the ancillary asset originator, sort of like the founder, the issuer, let's have the SEC decide if the issuer of this particular asset has been engaging in any managerial or entrepreneurial efforts in the last 12 months, right? It's like, why have an objective standard when you can have completely subjective ones. Unfortunately, I think that's kind of the story of governance. They want the power to make subjective decisions. They don't want super objective standards. Brown Beardo says under Powell, the Fed is operating a deficit for the first time ever in its history. That and the 700 million overruns discussed yesterday led to this investigation. Got to follow the facts wherever they lead. Yeah, I mean, it could be. You make good points here. You make good points. It could be that. It could be that they find out that Powell knowingly misled Congress. Maybe, maybe there's something there. I've been contending that I don't think he would take those kind of risks. I could see carelessness, negligence. Negligence is possible. I would be surprised if there was any kind of intentional embezzlement or anything like that by Powell personally. Could there have been negligence? Sure. Mistakes? Sure. Negligent mistakes. Those things for sure. Senators have decades-long relationship with TradFi. Absolutely true. They are a centralized authority. True. As per usual, the lobbyist wins the day and money rules. Senate more centralized than Congress. True. Definitionally. When you've got when you've got 2 senators per state and you've got, what is the current count on the House? Like 435 or something like that. I haven't checked in a long time, so it's probably a different number than that. But it's they're 2 very different bodies, and you're right. The right way to describe it is the Senate is more centralized than the House. They're both a part of Congress, but the House is definitely more decentralized than the Senate for sure. So that's what we're looking at on this bill. Tomorrow we'll probably have some word on amendments, and then on Thursday, we might have debates on some of those potential amendments. And then we might have, Thursday-ish, we might have another draft, and people have to go through and hopefully there'll be a legit markup so we can see changes from the draft that came out today. Maybe there won't be, maybe there will, but hopefully they make a little progress and it's a little bit better bill that comes out of this than the one we saw today. But like I said, is there fuckery in this bill? Yes. Does Cardano get fucked slightly? Not as bad as some of the other blockchains. Not as good as the chosen 8. So I don't think it's good. Unlike everybody else, I don't think it's good for the Congress to be picking winners. But that is what we've got on January 13th. So thanks everybody for joining. Guinness Speak says, thanks for the show tonight. The AOS crew is solid. Good night all. Thank you to everybody for joining. I hope everybody is still having a great week. I hope you're looking forward to a good rest of the week. And we'll keep following this draft and what happens in the subsequent days. Hopefully the news gets a little bit better. But in the meantime, hope everybody has a great night. And I will talk to you soon.